My name is Clara, and I'm 67 years old. But the story I'm about to tell you began over 20 years ago. When I was 45, the age I learned that sometimes family can make you feel lonelier than strangers ever could. Back then, my life revolved around my family, my husband, Daniel, and our two children, Elise and Graham. Sunday dinners were sacred in our home. I used to wake early to prepare everything from scratch: roast chicken marinated in herbs, mashed potatoes whipped to perfection, apple pie cooling on the counter while soft music played in the background. The sound of laughter, the smell of fresh bread, the clatter of forks, it all made our little house feel alive. When Daniel passed suddenly from a heart attack, that laughter went quiet. The house still smelled of dinner, but it never quite felt the same. I remember sitting at the head of the table after his funeral, trying to eat, but every bite turned to sand in my mouth. Still, I carried on, believing that Elise and Graham needed me to stay strong. At first, they came often. Elise, always chatty and full of energy, would call me from work every day just to say hello. Graham, more reserved, would show up on weekends to fix things around the house. They were my comfort, my reason to get up in the morning. But slowly, things began to change. It started small: canceled dinners, delayed calls. "Sorry, Mom, work's crazy this week. We'll come next weekend. Let's just meet out somewhere instead." Each excuse was harmless on its own, but over time, they formed a pattern. I didn't see it at first. I told myself they were busy building their own lives, just like Daniel and I once did. But I began noticing the silence. The house that once echoed with conversation grew quiet, the kind of quiet that hums in your ears and presses on your chest. I'd set the table for 3, out of habit, then catch myself and laugh bitterly, putting 2 plates away. The real breaking point came on Thanksgiving. I'd spent 2 days preparing everything: Daniel's old stuffing recipe, cranberry sauce made from scratch, and a turkey that could have fed a dozen people. I wanted that dinner to feel special, a reminder that even after loss, family could still hold each other together. That morning I called Elise. No answer. I texted Graham. Nothing. I tried to tell myself they were on their way. I lit candles, turned on soft jazz, and sat down to wait. Hours passed. The food went cold. The candles melted down to puddles of wax. Then, finally, my phone buzzed. "Sorry, Mom. Something came up. We'll try next weekend." I read that message over and over, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. Something came up. Not even an explanation. Just an excuse tossed carelessly through a text. I stared at the empty chairs, the tablecloth I'd ironed, the plates I'd polished, all for no one. I tried to eat alone, but the sound of my fork scraping the plate made me feel foolish, like I was pretending. Even the ticking clock on the wall sounded like mockery. I remember whispering to the empty room, "You could have just come." But my voice sounded foreign, hollow. That night, I sat in Daniel's old chair, the one he used to read in, and thought about how quickly love fades when it's taken for granted. I realized that I had spent years being the giver of time, of affection, of understanding, and I'd expected nothing in return except presence. But even that was too much for them. Days turned into weeks. Neither of them called. The loneliness settled in like dust, soft, quiet, impossible to clean away. I began to question everything. Did I do something wrong as a mother? Did I love them too much? Or not enough? I tried reaching out again, small things at first. A message to Graham asking if he'd like to come by for dinner. A voicemail to Elise, reminding her that I still had her favorite blanket here. No response. I started noticing how people in town pitied me. The neighbors would wave kindly but avoid eye contact. At church, friends asked, "How are the kids?" And I'd smile, lying through my teeth. "Oh, they're doing well, just busy." But the truth was, I didn't know what they were doing. I didn't even know who they were becoming. One Sunday evening, I sat at that long wooden dining table again, roast on one side, empty chairs on the other. The light from the chandelier flickered above me, and I realized something. I was waiting for people who weren't waiting for me. That realization hit like a wave. My hands shook as I lifted my wine glass. I thought of all the nights I'd stayed up worrying about them, all the meals I'd cooked, all the holidays I'd spent alone pretending I was fine. That night, for the first time, I didn't cry. I didn't call them. I didn't text. I just sat there in silence, letting the weight of it all settle, because deep down, I knew if I didn't stop waiting, they'd never stop taking my love for granted. I decided, right there in that dimly lit dining room, that something had to change. Maybe I couldn't make them love me, but I could stop letting their absence define me. It wasn't anger that I felt, not yet. It was something colder, something sharper, a quiet resolve. I cleared the table, packed the untouched food into containers, and placed them in the fridge. Then I walked past the family photos lining the hallway, our wedding picture, Elise's graduation, Graham's first car, and for the first time, I didn't feel warmth looking at them. I felt distance. When I reached the top of the stairs, I glanced back toward the dining room one last time. The flickering light made the empty chairs look like ghosts' reminders of laughter that once was. And that's when I understood something Daniel used to say: love is a choice, Clara. Not everyone chooses the same way. That night, I chose differently. I chose to stop being the woman who waited for calls that would never come. I chose to stop being the mother who begged for scraps of attention. I chose to become the kind of woman who remembered her worth even if her own children didn't. Because that empty seat across from me, the one that once belonged to family, it became something else that night. It became the place where my revenge was born. After that lonely Thanksgiving, I decided I would stop reaching out first. I told myself, if they want me in their lives, they'll call. For the first few weeks, I kept checking my phone anyway, waiting for a message, a voicemail, even a simple, "How are you, Mom?" But nothing came. The silence became my new routine. And then, one afternoon, the phone finally rang. It was Elise. My heart actually leapt when I saw her name flash across the screen. I smiled so wide it hurt. But the smile faded quickly once I heard her tone. She sounded rushed, almost rehearsed. "Hey Mom, how've you been?" she chirped. I told her I'd been fine, that it was nice to hear her voice. There was a short pause before she said, "Listen, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, but my rent went up this month. Could you help me out a little? Just until next paycheck?" I froze for a second. It had been weeks, months since we'd talked, and now she wanted money. Still, I said yes. I told myself that's what mothers do. I wired the amount she needed the same day. Even slipped in a little extra for groceries. She thanked me quickly and promised to visit soon. She didn't. 2 weeks later, Graham called. His voice was softer, more casual. "Hey Mom, just checking in, how are things?" I was overjoyed my son calling just to talk. But 5 minutes into the conversation, he sighed and said, "Man, my car insurance just skyrocketed. It's a nightmare. I don't know what I'm gonna do." I knew what was coming next. And sure enough, you think you could spot me a little just until I sort things out? I agreed. Again. That became the pattern. The calls always started warm, but within minutes, there was always a favor, always a need. I started to wonder if I was a mother or an ATM with a pulse. Still, I gave not because I was naive, but because I didn't want to believe that money was the only reason they remembered me. Then came the day I overheard something that changed everything. It was early evening. Elise had called me while on her way home from work. I had her on speakerphone while I folded laundry. She was talking about her boyfriend, Trevor, and how expensive everything was getting. I offered to help again. She declined this time, saying, "No, I'll be fine. Besides, once Mom's gone, I'll finally have my own house." She didn't realize I was still on the line. For a long moment, I just stood there, the towel slipping from my hands. My own daughter was talking about my death like it was some kind of financial plan. I hung up quietly and sat down. My chest hurt not the way it does from age, but from betrayal. That night, I opened an old notebook from the drawer by my bed. I wrote on the first page, "The record of love." Below it, I started listing every call, every request, every lie. April 3rd, Elise. Rent money. Promised visit. Never came. April 19th, Graham. Insurance payment. No thank you message. May 2nd, Elise. Called for car repair. Asked about life insurance. It sounds strange, but writing it all down helped me see the truth I'd been avoiding. Love doesn't ask for proof, but manipulation always leaves a trail. By early summer, my health had started to dip. I was getting dizzy spells and needed help carrying groceries. But I never told them. I wanted to see if they'd notice. They didn't. Weeks passed. No visits, no calls, just silence again, the kind that crawled through the walls. Then, one morning, I fainted in the kitchen. When I came to, the kettle had boiled dry, and I was lying on the tile floor, dazed. I called Ruby, my neighbor, who rushed over immediately. She took me to the doctor, sat with me through the tests, and drove me home afterward. When I got back, I checked my phone. Not a single message from either of my children. The next day, I received a text from Graham, not asking about my health, of course. He wrote, "Hey Mom, do you still have Dad's old watch? I was thinking of keeping it safe for you." Safe for me. I almost laughed. I could read between every line. They weren't worried about me. They were circling, waiting, calculating. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at that notebook now halfway full. The words on those pages weren't just records. They were proof that love, when unreciprocated, turns into something else, something hollow. I thought about how, years ago, Daniel and I used to talk about inheritance. He always said, "Clara, make sure our kids know love matters more than the will." I used to nod, believing they would always understand that. Now, I wasn't so sure. A few days later, I decided to test something. I called Elise and mentioned casually that I wasn't feeling well lately, that maybe I should update some of my paperwork just in case. Her tone changed instantly. "What kind of paperwork?" she asked, pretending to sound casual. "Oh, just the usual," I replied. "You know, the will, the insurance forms, things like that." She paused. "Well, if you ever need help with that, I can come by. Maybe this weekend?" That was the fastest she'd ever agreed to visit. When she came, she brought flowers, hugged me tightly, and said she'd missed me. For a moment, I almost believed her. But when her eyes wandered toward the folder on my coffee table labeled estate, I saw the truth flicker behind her smile. A few days later, Graham called too, suddenly eager to check on me. He said, "If you ever need help managing things like the bills or the house, I could take some pressure off you." Pressure. That's what I was to them, an obligation with potential payout. By then, I'd stopped being surprised. I'd started seeing them for who they'd become. Or maybe, for who they always were. Still, part of me ached to believe they could change. That maybe, deep down, there was still love beneath the greed. But every call ended the same way, not with "I love you," but with "can you?" One evening, as I sat alone on the porch, I realized how strange it was to crave affection from people who only saw me as a transaction. The sun was setting, and the wind carried the faint scent of lilacs from the garden. I closed my eyes and whispered to the empty air, "I'm done being the giver." I didn't know what my next step would be yet. I only knew that something inside me had hardened. I no longer wanted to be needed, I wanted to be remembered. That night, I took out my notebook again and turned to a new page. At the top, I wrote, "They stopped calling for love, now they'll call for answers." I didn't realize it then, but that was the first real act of rebellion I'd made in my entire life. Because from that moment forward, my kindness wasn't for them anymore. It was for me. And deep down, in a quiet part of my mind, a new thought began to form, cold, steady, and powerful. If they only wanted my money, then money would become my weapon. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when Ruby first appeared in my life, the kind of day that felt like any other, until it didn't. I had gone to the grocery store alone, as usual. I remember the cart's squeaky wheel and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. My joints ached, and my head spun a little from the dizziness that had started haunting me lately. I was reaching for a carton of milk when it slipped from my hands and burst open on the floor. Before I could even bend down, a voice beside me said, "Don't move, I've got it." I turned, and there she was, a woman in her early 30s, bright auburn hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing scrubs and a kind smile. Her name tag read Ruby M. She knelt, grabbed paper towels from a nearby shelf, and started wiping the mess before I could protest. "They make these cartons too slippery," she joked, glancing up at me. "Are you okay?" I nodded, embarrassed. "I'm fine, just clumsy today." But Ruby didn't just smile and walk away like most people would. She stayed insisted on helping me finish my shopping. When I tried to refuse, she said, "You remind me of my mom. She used to hate asking for help too." Something about her tone, warm, unguarded, made me pause. I didn't know it yet, but that moment was the first crack in the loneliness that had surrounded me for years. Outside the store, she helped load my groceries into the car. Then she noticed the small oxygen monitor I carried in my purse and frowned. "You live alone?" "Yes," I admitted. "My children, they're grown now, busy." Ruby hesitated for a second before replying softly, "That's what my mom used to say too." A few days later, I found a little note tucked under my front door. It was from her. "Just checking on you, Clara. I'm next door if you ever need help. Ruby." That single note meant more than any message I'd received from my own children in months. Weeks passed, and true to her word, Ruby became a regular visitor. Sometimes she'd bring me homemade soup after her nursing shifts. Other times, she'd stop by just to share a cup of tea and gossip about her day. She'd laugh easily, tell stories about the patients she cared for, not the tragic parts, but the funny little moments that made her job human. Once, she told me about an old man who refused to take his medication unless the pills were blessed by a priest. She laughed so hard telling it that I couldn't help but laugh too. I had forgotten what that sounded like, real, effortless laughter. Soon, she started helping around the house, not because I asked, but because she noticed the things I struggled with. One afternoon, I caught her fixing a broken garden hose, without a word. Another day, she mended a loose cabinet door. I tried to pay her once, but she shook her head. "You don't pay family, Clara," she said simply. That word family caught me off guard. I hadn't heard it said with warmth in years. Sometimes, we'd sit on the porch together, watching the sun dip below the trees. She told me about her mother, how she'd taken care of her through cancer until the very end. "It was hard," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I'd give anything to have her back. Even one more day." When she said that, I felt something stir inside me, guilt maybe. Because my children had the chance to have me every day, and they chose not to. One evening, I found myself confessing everything to her, how Elise and Graham only called when they needed something, how I'd spent holidays alone, how I'd started keeping a notebook of their betrayals. Ruby listened without judgment. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand gently. "You deserve better than that," she said. "You deserve to be surrounded by people who choose you, not people who remember you only when it's convenient." Her words echoed in my mind long after she left that night. People who choose you. That phrase rolled around in my head for days, like a stone polishing itself smooth. For so long I had accepted the love my children gave, thin, conditional, transactional. I told myself it was enough because they were blood. But Ruby, this young woman who had no obligation to me, showed more care in a few weeks than my own family had in years. That realization hurt. But it also woke something in me. One Sunday morning, Ruby and I decided to cook breakfast together. She took over the kitchen like she'd lived there forever, dancing around with a spatula while humming some pop song I didn't know. We made pancakes, scrambled eggs, and coffee so strong it could wake the dead. As we sat down to eat, she said with a grin, "You know, Clara, you're actually fun to be around. You should give yourself more credit." I laughed, shaking my head. "You sound like my late husband. He used to say that too." She smiled softly. "Then he must have been a good man." He was, I said quietly. He always believed kindness would come back to you. Ruby looked at me for a long moment. Maybe it finally did. That day, after she left, I stood by the window watching her walk across the lawn to her house. The sun caught her hair, turning it gold. For a fleeting second, I imagined she was my daughter, not by blood but by choice. That thought both comforted and terrified me. Because if a stranger could make me feel loved, what did that say about my own children? That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in bed with the lamp on, staring at Daniel's photo on my nightstand. "You'd like her," I whispered to the frame. "She's good, honest. The kind of person who still believes in decency." I thought about all the money I'd given to Elise and Graham, thousands over the years, and how not a single penny of it had bought me 1 ounce of affection. Meanwhile, Ruby gave me her time, her patience, her presence, and asked for nothing in return. That was when a quiet realization took root. Maybe the love we receive later in life isn't a replacement for what we lost. Maybe it's a reward for surviving it. Ruby never once mentioned the word inheritance. She never asked about my finances, my home, or my will. Instead, she asked about my favorite books, Daniel's old recipes, the roses in my garden. She cared about me. And slowly, I began to care about her too, not as a neighbor, not even as a friend, but as the daughter I wished I'd had. A few weeks later, when I fell ill again and she insisted on taking me to the doctor, I didn't argue. For once, I let someone care for me without shame. When we came back, she made soup and sat by my side until I fell asleep on the couch. As I drifted off, I heard her whisper softly, "You're not alone anymore, Clara." And in that moment, for the first time in years, I believed it. What I didn't know then, as the rain tapped gently against the windows and Ruby covered me with a blanket, was that she wouldn't just be my comfort. She would become my reason to fight back. Because Ruby didn't just remind me what love looked like, she showed me what family really meant. And she had no idea that she'd soon be the key to everything I was about to do next. It had been almost 6 months since I'd seen either of my children in person when, one sunny afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Ruby was at work, and I rarely got visitors otherwise. When I opened the door, my breath caught in my throat. There they were. Elise and Graham, standing on my porch, both wearing strained smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. They weren't alone, each brought their spouse. Elise's husband, Trevor, held a bouquet of flowers that looked like they'd been bought at the last minute from a gas station. Graham's wife, Nadia, waved politely, though her gaze flicked around the house behind me, curious and assessing. "Mom, surprise," Elise said in a tone too bright to be real. For a moment, I just stared at them. The last time they had come to see me together was at Daniel's funeral more than a decade ago. I felt a dozen emotions all at once: confusion, suspicion, a flicker of hope, and a deep, quiet ache. I stepped aside, forcing a smile. Come in, come in." They filed into the living room, and for a few moments, it felt like stepping into a memory. The same worn couch, the same framed family photos, the same faint smell of lavender and lemon polish. They talked at first, small talk, light chatter, how work was crazy, how traffic was awful, how I'd kept the place so tidy. I sat across from them, nodding, watching, waiting. I could tell they were uncomfortable, like guests in a stranger's home. After a while, Elise glanced at Graham, then said, "Mom, we were thinking, maybe it's time we all started spending more time together again. Family dinners and all that." Her tone was sweet, almost syrupy. But it was too polished, too smooth. My mother's intuition, the one I'd ignored for years, whispered that they were rehearsed. I said, "I'd like that." Then, as if on cue, Graham leaned forward. "You've got such a big house, Mom. Must be a lot to manage all on your own." There it was, the opening. I kept my expression neutral. "It is, sometimes." He smiled. "You've done an amazing job keeping it up. But maybe it's time to think about downsizing. Less stress for you, you know?" Elise chimed in, pretending to agree. "Yeah, Maybe a nice condo or a retirement community. Something cozy. You'd have people around, meals cooked, activities. It'd be fun. The words sounded hollow. I nodded slowly. And what would I do with this place? Oh well, Elise said lightly. You could always sign it over to us now. That way there's no hassle later. We could, you know, keep it in the family. Ruby's words echoed in my head. You deserve to be surrounded by people who choose you. I looked at my daughter's eager face and my son's careful smirk and realized they weren't choosing me. They were choosing what I owned. I smiled faintly and said, "That's very thoughtful, dear. I'll think about it." They both relaxed, mistaking my calm for compliance. Dinner that night was awkward. I hadn't planned for guests, so I threw together what I could: pasta, salad, a pie I'd frozen weeks ago. While I cooked, I overheard bits of conversation drifting from the living room. Elise whispered, "If she sells, we could split it. That's at least 300 grand each." And Graham replied, "Let's just stay on her good side for now." My hands trembled as I sliced the bread. I wasn't angry yet, not quite. What I felt was deeper, heavier disappointment. The kind that seeps into your bones. At dinner, they complimented everything exaggeratedly. "This is delicious, Mom. You're still the best cook." Every word was dipped in sugar but left a bitter aftertaste. Trevor and Nadia mostly stayed quiet, occasionally nodding. I could see the discomfort in Nadia's eyes. Maybe she felt the tension too. When they finally left, Elise hugged me at the door. "We'll come again soon, okay? Maybe next week?" "Of course," I said softly, though I already knew they wouldn't. As their cars pulled away, I stood on the porch for a long time. The night air cool against my skin. I thought about how strange it was that I could miss people even while they were standing right in front of me. When I went back inside, the house smelled faintly of perfume and deceit. I sat at the table where we'd eaten and opened my notebook, The Record of Love. I flipped to a new page and wrote, "They came for dinner, but not for me." I stared at that sentence for a long time, tracing the ink with my finger. I'd been fooling myself for too long, hoping for signs of affection where there was only calculation. The next morning, as I sat with my coffee, Ruby stopped by. She noticed my red eyes immediately. "Rough night?" she asked gently. I told her everything: how they'd come, what they'd said, what I'd overheard. Ruby's jaw tightened as she listened. "That's awful, Clara." "So sorry." I shrugged, forcing a weak smile. "Don't be. It just confirmed what I already knew." She hesitated. "What are you going to do?" I looked out the window, watching a pair of robins flutter in the yard. "I'm going to call your friend, the lawyer you mentioned. The one who helped you with your mom's estate." Ruby blinked. "Mr. Alden?" "Yes," I said. "It's time I made sure my love and everything I've worked for goes where it's truly deserved." She didn't argue. She just nodded slowly, understanding that this wasn't about money anymore. It was about dignity. That evening, I went through my files, the deeds, the bank papers, the old will Daniel and I had written years ago. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. Back then, we'd left everything to our children, confident they'd honor what we'd built together. But Daniel hadn't lived long enough to see what they'd become. I imagined him sitting across from me, his gentle voice in the air. "Do what you think is right, Clara." By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I had made my decision. The next morning, I called Ruby. "Can you give me Mr. Alden's number?" She did, without hesitation. And as I wrote it down, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: control. I didn't know exactly what my plan would look like yet, but I knew one thing for certain: I wouldn't let greed write the ending of my story. I would. That evening, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window, watching the moon rise over the garden. I thought about how quiet revenge can be, how it doesn't always come with fire and fury. Sometimes, it comes softly, hidden beneath calm smiles and careful words. The visit from my children had changed everything. It hadn't reignited love or reconciliation. It had stripped away the last illusion I was holding on to. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't the mother waiting by the phone or the widow longing for company. I was the woman preparing for justice, one signature at a time. If they could play the game of inheritance, so could I. But my rules would be far crueler. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The sunlight was spilling through the lace curtains, but I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air. It was the weight of the decision I'd made the night before, a decision I knew would change everything. After breakfast, I called the number Ruby had given me. A calm male voice answered, "Alden and Associates, how may I help you?" I took a deep breath. "I'd like to make an appointment with Mr. Alden. It's about updating a will." "Of course," the secretary said. "How soon would you like to come in?" "As soon as possible." That afternoon, Ruby drove me to his office, a quiet brick building tucked between a florist and a small insurance agency. The sign outside was simple, discreet. I remember thinking that was exactly what I needed, discretion. When I stepped inside, the smell of leather and paper filled the air. Mr. Alden greeted me himself. He was a tall man in his 50s, with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Hartman," he said, shaking my hand. "Please, come in. Ruby's told me a little about you." I sat across from him in a room lined with books and thick folders. My palms were sweating. "I want to rewrite my will," I began. He nodded, taking out a notepad. "That's perfectly fine. May I ask your reason for the update?" I met his gaze. "Because I want my love and everything I've worked for to go where it's truly deserved." He studied me for a long moment, then leaned back. "That's one of the clearest reasons I've ever heard." I smiled faintly. "I don't want to leave anything to my children." He didn't look surprised. Instead, he asked gently, "Would you like to explain why?" So I told him. I told him about the years of distance, the silence, the phone calls that only came when they wanted money. I told him about the Thanksgiving dinners eaten alone, and the night they came pretending to care, only to ask for the house. When I finished, Mr. Alden's expression softened, but he didn't pity me. He respected me. "I understand," he said quietly. "And who would you like to leave your estate to?" I hesitated, glancing toward the window where Ruby sat waiting in the car outside. "To someone who earned it. My friend and neighbor, Ruby Miller." He nodded, writing it down without comment. "I'd also like to make several charitable donations," I continued. "To the local hospice, the women's shelter, and the community library. They've helped people when my own family wouldn't." "Understood," he said. "And my children." I paused, feeling the weight of the next words. "They can have $1 each." Symbolically. He looked up from his notes, one eyebrow raised. $1? "Yes," I said evenly. "So they know they weren't forgotten, only excluded." Mr. Alden smiled slightly, not in amusement, but in understanding. "Very well, I'll prepare the paperwork. We'll make it official and fully legal. I'll also ensure it's sealed confidentially, only to be revealed after your passing." "Thank you," I said. Feeling a strange calm settle over me, he folded his hands. "If I may, Mrs. Hartman, this decision, it's not easy. You're certain?" I thought of all the dinners spent alone, all the excuses, all the lies. "I'm certain," I said. "I gave them every chance to love me. This is just me finally loving myself." He nodded and began typing, the quiet click of the keyboard echoing through the room. I watched him draft the new document line after line, each sentence feeling like a brick in the wall I was finally building between me and the pain I'd carried for years. After the meeting, he printed several copies and read the main points aloud to me for verification. Every word felt deliberate, final. When he finished, I signed my name at the bottom in slow, steady strokes. "Congratulations, Mrs. Hartman," he said, sliding the pen away. "Your estate is now officially updated." I exhaled deeply, as though I'd been holding my breath for years. "It feels lighter," I murmured. He gave a small nod. "That's how it's supposed to feel when you've made peace with your choices." As I stood to leave, he added, "I'll store the document in our private vault. You can rest assured it's safe. And if you wish, We can prepare a secondary sealed letter, personal messages to accompany the will when it's opened. I smiled faintly. Yes, I think I'd like that later. Outside, Ruby was waiting by the car, leaning against the door with a curious look. Well? She asked. I gave her a knowing smile. It's done. She blinked. Already? Yes, I said, buckling my seatbelt. I've just taken the first step toward peace. On the drive home. She didn't pry. She didn't ask what I'd done or who I'd named. She just smiled softly and said, "You seem different." I feel different, I admitted. For the first time in years, I feel in control. When I got home, I brewed a pot of tea and sat in Daniel's old armchair by the window. The late afternoon light fell across the living room, turning everything golden. I thought about how much my husband had trusted our children, how certain he was that they'd care for me the way he once did. I whispered to his photo on the mantel. I'm sorry, Daniel. But you were wrong about them. A few days later, Mr. Alden called to confirm that everything had been filed and notarized. It's official, he said. You have nothing to worry about. No one will know until the time comes. Good, I replied. That's exactly what I want. After that, something inside me began to heal. I found myself sleeping better, breathing easier. The weight I'd carried, the constant ache of waiting for affection, began to fade. Ruby noticed too. You're smiling more lately, she said one morning as we tended to my rose bushes. Maybe I've finally learned how to let go, I said. She didn't know what I meant. And I didn't tell her. Some secrets were meant to stay buried until their moment arrived, but fate has a funny way of stirring things before you're ready. Because just when I thought I could quietly live out my days in peace, the phone started ringing again. It was Elise, first suddenly concerned about my health. Then Graham checking in just because. They started visiting more often, bringing groceries, asking about my daily routine. At first, I wanted to believe they'd changed. I wanted to think maybe my silence had woken something in them. But the way they asked about my finances, my medications, my will, it all felt rehearsed. They were circling again. One evening, after they both left, I found myself staring at my reflection in the window. The woman looking back at me wasn't weak anymore. She wasn't desperate for love. She was patient. Because she knew something they didn't, a truth that would shatter their perfect little plans when the time came. I closed the curtains and turned off the lights, a small smile curving on my lips. The secret will was signed. The game had begun. Little did I know, my children would soon force me to reveal my hand far sooner than planned. It started subtly, like the change in air before a storm. One moment, I was invisible to my children. The next, I couldn't go 2 days without hearing from one of them. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. Maybe they'd finally remembered that I existed. Maybe, somehow, they'd sensed how close I'd come to giving up on them entirely. But deep down, I knew better. The calls began exactly 3 weeks after I signed my new will. The timing was too perfect. The first was from Elise. Her voice unusually bright. Hey Mom, I was just thinking about you. How are you feeling? I hesitated. That question, how are you feeling, wasn't one she'd asked in years. I'm fine, I said cautiously. Why do you ask? Oh, no reason, she replied too quickly. Just wanted to check in. Maybe I could come by this weekend? I'll bring lunch. I agreed, though suspicion prickled at the back of my mind. When she arrived, she came armed with groceries, flowers, and that same fake warmth I'd seen before. She fussed over me, straightening pillows, organizing my kitchen drawers, all while dropping little comments that didn't sit right. Wow, Mom, you really shouldn't be doing all this alone. You know, you could use some help managing things, finances, bills, all that. You've still got the house in your name, right? Every question came wrapped in sweetness but reeked of intent. Still, I played along. I smiled. I let her talk. That evening, after she left, I sat at the kitchen table, my notebook open in front of me. On a fresh page, I wrote, Elise visited, groceries, questions about finances. Smile didn't reach her eyes, I didn't need proof, my gut already knew. But habits are hard to break, and documenting their behavior gave me clarity. A few days later, Graham called. His voice was soft, concerned. "Hey, Mom. Heard you weren't feeling great lately. Everything okay?" My heart skipped. Heard? Heard from who? "I'm fine," I said. "Who told you that?" He hesitated just long enough for me to catch it. "Oh, Elise mentioned you'd sounded tired. You sure you're all right?" Tired. That's the word she used. I felt a small, grim smile tug at my lips. "Yes, Graham. I'm fine. But it's sweet of you to check in." He laughed nervously. "You know me. Just making sure my favorite lady's okay." Favorite lady. He hadn't used that phrase since he was 12. By the end of the call, he had worked his way toward the same topic Elise had. My house, my health, my money. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. They knew something. Someone had told them. But who? The only person who knew about the will was Mr. Alden. And he was bound by law and reputation to keep it secret. The thought that twisted my stomach wasn't that he'd betrayed me, it was that maybe, somehow, Ruby had said something. Ruby, who had helped me find him. Ruby, who was the only person I truly trusted. I tried to dismiss the thought immediately. She'd never given me a reason to doubt her. But paranoia, once it plants its seed, grows quickly in the dark. 2 days later, Ruby stopped by after her shift, cheerful as always. She brought me soup and a small bouquet from her garden. But when she noticed I was quiet, she frowned. "You okay, Clara? You seem off." I looked at her for a long moment before asking softly, "Ruby, did you mention to anyone that I was updating my will?" Her face fell. "What? No. Of course not. Why would I?" "I don't know," I admitted, feeling ashamed even as I said it. "It's just strange. My kids have been calling nonstop, and they seem to know more than they should." Ruby reached across the table and took my hand firmly. "Clara, I would never betray your trust. Never." I saw the sincerity in her eyes and the guilt in myself for doubting her. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "It's just, they've been playing these games for so long, I forget what real honesty looks like." She squeezed my hand. "You have it here." And I did. That night, I decided not to question Ruby again. If my children had found out something, it wasn't from her. But that didn't mean they hadn't been snooping. The next weekend, Elise came over again, this time bringing her husband, Trevor. They arrived with big smiles and matching concern. Elise started cooking in my kitchen without asking, as if reclaiming her territory. Trevor wandered the house, commenting on the size, the potential value, the good bones. I sat in the living room, watching them like a ghost haunting her own home. At one point, Elise leaned in and said, "Mom, you know, if you ever needed to move into assisted living or something, I could take care of everything. Sell the house, handle the details, make sure you're comfortable." I tilted my head. "Sell the house? Why would you need to sell it?" "Oh, just to make things easier, financially." She smiled that too sweet smile again. Later that night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen, whispering. "They thought I'd gone to bed." Trevor said, "She's still sharp, you'll have to be careful." And Elise answered, "We just need to get her to trust us again. Once she's in assisted living, it'll be simple." I felt my breath hitch, fury burning through my chest. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. They weren't even pretending to care anymore. They were strategizing, planning their convenience like I was a business deal. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the moonlight through the window. It wasn't sadness I felt anymore. It was something colder. The next morning, I acted as though nothing had happened. I made them breakfast, smiled, thanked them for visiting. When they left, Elise kissed my cheek and said, "You'll call if you need anything, right, Mom?" I smiled. "Of course." As their car disappeared down the street, I whispered under my breath, "Don't worry. You'll be hearing from me soon enough." That night, I called Mr. Alden. I told him everything: the sudden visits, the questions, the pressure. He listened carefully, then said, "Mrs. Hartman, do not alter your will or reveal its contents under any circumstances. You made your decision with clarity. Let them show their true colors." I agreed. And as I hung up, a strange calm washed over me. Let them think they were winning. Let them believe they were manipulating me, because I was watching, listening, documenting every word, every whisper. In my notebook that night, I wrote, "They want me gone, but I'll decide when and how they lose me." Over the next few weeks, their concern became suffocating. Elise dropped by almost daily, bringing soup and pity. Graham called constantly, offering to handle paperwork or help with finances. They spoke with polished tenderness, but their eyes betrayed hunger. The funny thing about greed is that it makes people predictable. It turns them into creatures of habit, easy to study, easy to trap. And I was done being their victim. I was done being the waiting mother. The next time they called, I smiled to myself before answering. My voice was calm, steady, controlled. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. "I've been thinking, maybe you're right. Maybe it is time to make some changes." I heard Elise's sharp intake of breath on the other end. That was the moment she thought she'd won. But she hadn't. Not even close. They wanted me gone. What they didn't know was that I'd already planned exactly what would happen when I was. They wanted me gone. I just hadn't decided yet how I'd make them regret it. After weeks of enduring their feigned concern, I decided it was time to see how deep their performance went. I'd spent months listening, observing, writing in my little notebook, but now I needed something undeniable proof that my children's love came with conditions. So I devised a test. It wasn't impulsive. I thought about it for days: how to phrase it, when to call, how to sound just frail enough to trigger their pity without alerting their suspicion. I wasn't trying to trap them with cruelty. I just wanted the truth, once and for all. On a Tuesday morning, I picked up the phone and called Elise first. She answered on the second ring, her tone warm and honeyed. "Mom! How are you feeling?" "I've been a bit weak lately," I said softly. "I think I might need some help around here soon. Maybe it's time to start dividing things, to make sure everyone's taken care of." There was a long pause. Then came the sound of her quick inhale. "Oh, Mom, that's so thoughtful of you. Of course, we don't need to talk about that right now. But if it makes you feel better, we can plan something. I can come by this weekend. We'll go over, arrangements." Her voice trembled slightly, the way it always did when she was excited but trying to hide it. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. That would be nice. After we hung up, I called Graham. He was even faster to respond. "Hey, Mom. How's my favorite lady?" I repeated the same story: my supposed frailty, the idea of dividing things early. There was a beat of silence, then his voice softened in mock concern. "Well, Mom, that's not something you should stress about. I mean, I'd be happy to help you handle it just to make things easier, you know?" "Oh, I wouldn't want to burden you," I said. "Burden? Never. You've done so much for us. It's only fair." Fair. That word made my skin crawl. Fairness had never been part of their vocabulary when it came to love, only when it came to assets. By the time I hung up, both my children had agreed to come for dinner that Sunday. I could almost feel their anticipation through the phone lines, the same energy they'd once had as kids waiting for Christmas morning. But this time, the gifts would come with strings attached. When Sunday arrived, I made the house look just the way they remembered. I wanted it to feel familiar, comforting, the perfect stage for my experiment. The dining table gleamed beneath soft candlelight. I cooked their favorite dishes, not out of nostalgia, but precision. Every detail mattered. When the doorbell rang, I smoothed my dress and opened the door with a smile. Elise walked in first, carrying a bottle of champagne. "For a celebration," she said brightly. Graham followed, wearing his nicest jacket. "You look great, Mom. We were worried about you." "Were you?" I asked lightly. They laughed, missing the sarcasm. During dinner, they were all warmth and compliments. You're still the best cook. You look amazing for your age. We should do this more often. And for a little while, I let myself enjoy it even though I knew every word was staged. There was still something comforting about the sound of my family's voices in the house again. Then, halfway through the meal, I began my act. I set down my fork and sighed, glancing between them. You know, I said softly, I've been thinking a lot about the future lately. I don't want things to be difficult for you when I'm gone. Both of them straightened in their chairs instantly. Elise leaned forward, her smile widening. Oh, Mom, don't talk like that. I just want things to be fair, I continued. So I thought maybe we could start dividing some of the estate now before anything happens. That way there's no confusion later. Elise reached for her glass of champagne, trying to hide her excitement. That's very smart, actually. Avoids legal hassle and all that. Graham nodded, ever the calmer of the two. That's really considerate, Mom. I mean, you've always been thoughtful. We'd never want to take advantage of you. The irony almost made me laugh. I tilted my head. That's good to hear, because I've been getting a lot of help lately from my neighbor, Ruby. You remember me mentioning her? Elise's smile faltered. Ruby? Yes. She's been wonderful. Helping with errands, doctor visits, everything really. I don't know what I'd do without her. Graham cleared his throat. That's nice of her. Elise forced a laugh. Wow, sounds like she's part of the family now. She's certainly been acting like it, I said, my tone light but deliberate. I've even been thinking about how to thank her properly. The silence that followed was deafening. Elise's fork clinked against her plate. Oh? What do you mean, exactly? Oh, nothing specific, I said, pretending to wave it off. I just think kindness deserves recognition. Their expressions hardened just for a second, but enough for me to see it. Their smiles were gone. The mask had cracked. I sat back and sipped my wine, savoring the moment. When dinner ended, Elise hugged me tightly at the door. You know we love you, right? She said, her voice sweet again. I know, I replied, smiling. Love you too. After they left, I didn't clean up right away. I just sat at the table, staring at the half-empty glasses, the crumbs on the plates, remnants of the performance we'd all just participated in. It was almost laughable. They thought I'd fallen for it. They thought a few compliments and home visits could erase years of neglect. But the truth was, I had all the evidence I needed now. Their interest wasn't love, it was possession. Later that night, I called Ruby. She answered, sleepy but concerned. Clara, everything okay? I need to see you tomorrow, I said. It's time you knew everything. When she came by the next morning, I poured us both coffee and slid my notebook across the table. She hesitated before opening it, scanning the pages filled with dates, notes, and quotes, every lie, every manipulation carefully recorded. Her eyes widened. You've been documenting this? For months, I said. They think I'm fragile, confused, forgetful. But I remember everything. Ruby looked at me for a long time, then smiled sadly. You're stronger than they'll ever realize. Maybe, I said quietly. But I'm tired of strength. I want peace. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Then let's get you that peace. That was the moment I decided my revenge wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be cruel or chaotic. It would be quiet, a truth revealed at the perfect time, when they least expected it. For now, I would keep pretending. I would play the doting, naive mother they believed me to be. But every word they spoke, every action they took, would go straight into my notebook. Every smile they faked would bring them one step closer to the moment they'd lose everything. That night, before bed, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Her eyes weren't sad anymore. They were clear, deliberate, knowing. The kind of eyes you'd never lie to twice. They thought they were testing my will. But in truth, I was testing their love, and they had already failed. That's when I told Ruby everything, and together, we began planning the reveal. Once Ruby knew everything, the tone between us changed. She stopped treating me like someone who needed protecting and started treating me like a woman with a mission. For weeks, we met in quiet corners of my house at the kitchen table, on the back porch, sometimes in the garden, whispering plans between sips of tea. "This isn't about revenge," I told her one evening as the sun bled into the horizon. "It's about truth. I just want them to see what they've become." Ruby nodded slowly. "Then we'll make sure they do." We began with the details. If Elise and Graham wanted to talk about my future, then I'd give them that chance on my terms. I would invite them to a special dinner. Not another plea for love, but a performance. Every dish, every word, every look would serve a purpose. I started by calling Mr. Alden, my lawyer. "I need you here that night," I said. "Not as an attorney, just a Obama, friend of the family. You'll know when to step in." He hesitated. "You're certain about this, Mrs. Hartman?" "I've never been more certain." He agreed without another question. Next came the invitation. I wrote the same message to both my children. Dinner at my place Sunday evening. I'd like to discuss some future plans and spend time together as a family. Simple, polite, impossible to resist. When I pressed send, my heart pounded not from fear, but anticipation. For years I had been the one waiting for their visits. Now they would come because I had summoned them. During the following days, Ruby and I prepared the house. We polished the dining table until it gleamed. She helped me hang fresh curtains, light vanilla-scented candles, and polish the silverware Daniel and I had received as a wedding gift decades ago. "It has to look warm," I told her. "Comfortable. Familiar. I want them to feel safe right before I pull the rug out from under them." Ruby grinned. "You're terrifying when you want to be." "Good," I said. "Let's hope they notice." We rehearsed the evening like a play. I practiced smiling at all the right moments, steering the conversation toward harmless topics before gently introducing the one they wanted to hear. Ruby would act as a quiet helper, serving dishes, clearing plates until the moment came for Mr. Alden to appear. By Friday, everything was set. The only thing left was to make the dinner itself perfect. Saturday morning, I went to the market for ingredients. I bought the same foods I used to make when my family still loved me: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, homemade bread, and Elise's favorite dessert, lemon pie with cream on top. I remembered the last time I'd made that pie. Elise had been 23, home for the weekend. She'd barely touched it, claiming she was watching her sugar. That memory still stung, but this time, I wasn't baking for affection. I was baking for closure. When Sunday came, I woke early. I set the table with the finest linen, arranged flowers in the center, and placed 3 tall candles between the plates. I even played soft classical music in the background, the same playlist Daniel used to hum along to. Ruby arrived just after lunch to help with final touches. She wore a pale blue dress and tied her hair back neatly. "Ready?" she asked. I looked around the room. The evening of the dinner arrived with a kind of stillness that didn't feel accidental. The air was heavy with tension and candle wax. The table gleamed with perfect order, silverware aligned, napkins folded just so. Every detail was designed to feel familiar, comforting, deceptively ordinary. Ruby and I had spent days preparing. She was more nervous than I was, pacing around the kitchen as she adjusted the plates again and again. "You don't have to do this," she'd said that morning, her voice thick with worry. "Yes," I told her simply. "I do." By the time the doorbell rang, I had already transformed into the version of myself they remembered: gentle, accommodating, soft-spoken. The mother who would rather forgive than confront. The mother they thought they could manipulate forever. When I opened the door, Elise and Graham stepped inside together. Elise wore a polished smile and a designer dress, her arm hooked in Trevor's. Graham followed behind with his wife, Nadia, who looked tense, as though she knew this was going to be more than a family dinner. "Wow, Mom, you've really outdone yourself," Elise said, scanning the table with appreciation that felt rehearsed. "It looks beautiful," Graham added. "You didn't have to go all out like this." Oh, nonsense, I said lightly. It's been so long since we were all together. I wanted tonight to be special. I guided them to the table. The scent of rosemary chicken filled the air, blending with the faint piano music playing softly in the background. Ruby was already there, sitting quietly at the far end. She smiled politely, but I could see the worry flickering in her eyes. Elise's brow furrowed slightly when she saw Ruby. "Oh, you invited your neighbor?" "Yes," I said smoothly. "She's become a dear friend. I wanted her here." Elise hesitated, but forced another smile. "Of course." Graham shrugged, clearly uninterested, and took his seat. The first half of the evening was polite, almost painfully so. The conversation stayed surface-level work, weather, trivialities. They laughed a little too loudly, complimented the food too eagerly. It was a performance. All of it. I played my part just as well. I smiled, nodded, asked about their lives. But my mind wasn't on their words, it was on Mr. Alden, sitting quietly in the corner of the dining room. He looked entirely out of place among the floral china and crystal glasses. A gray suit, a leather briefcase, calm eyes that missed nothing. He'd arrived just before them, introduced as an old friend of the family. Neither Elise nor Graham questioned it, not at first, but they would. When dessert was served, a warm apple tart with cinnamon and cream, I decided it was time. I set down my fork and folded my hands neatly on the table. "There's actually another reason I wanted you all here tonight," I began. Elise glanced up immediately. "Oh? What's that?" "Well," I said, glancing toward Mr. Alden, "I've been working with a friend here on something important. I thought it was only fair that you both be present when I share it." The faint smile froze on Elise's face. "What do you mean, share?" Mr. Alden cleared his throat and opened his briefcase. He withdrew a crisp white envelope and placed it on the table. The sound of it hitting the wood was sharper than it should have been. "This," he said calmly, "is your mother's final, signed will and testament." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the piano music seemed to fade. Elise blinked, confusion flashing across her face before she forced a laugh. "Wait. Final? Mom, why are we? What's going on?" I smiled gently, as though nothing were amiss. "Just a formality. I wanted to be transparent, to avoid confusion later. You both deserve to know where things stand." Graham frowned, his voice tight. "Mom, you're not dying. You don't have to—" "Of course not," I interrupted softly. "But it's good to have things in order. Please, Mr. Alden." He nodded and opened the envelope. The sound of paper rustling filled the room, fragile and deliberate. Ruby sat still, her eyes on me, her hands folded in her lap. Mr. Alden began reading. His tone was professional, detached, but the words landed like stones dropped in water. He read the formal preamble, my full name, my intention, my soundness of mind. Then he began listing the beneficiaries. "To my children, Elise Hartman and Graham Hartman, I leave." Elise leaned forward, anticipation in her eyes. Graham folded his hands, pretending calm but barely hiding his eagerness. The sum of $1 each, to serve as a symbolic acknowledgement of their existence, and a reminder that love cannot be measured by inheritance. The room went still. Elise blinked, then let out a short, incredulous laugh. "I'm sorry, what?" Graham's jaw clenched. "This is some kind of joke, right?" Mr. Alden continued unfazed. "The remainder of the estate, including the property located at 48 Maple Grove, all savings accounts and assets, shall be transferred upon Mrs. Hartman's passing to Ruby Miller, who has acted with compassion and integrity where others have not." Elise's face turned red, her voice rising. "You've got to be kidding me." I met her gaze calmly. "No, Elise, I'm not." Ruby tried to speak, her voice shaking. "Mrs. Hartman, Clara, I didn't." "I know," I said gently, turning to her. "You didn't ask for this. You earned it." Elise slammed her hand against the table, making the glasses rattle. "This isn't fair. She's just some woman from down the street." "You're telling me we get $1? $1? Mr. Alden folded the papers neatly, unbothered. Everything is legally binding, witnessed, and notarized. There's nothing to contest. Graham stood abruptly. You can't be serious, Mom. After everything we've done for you? I looked up at him slowly. Everything you've done? Like what, exactly? The calls when you needed money? The visits when you wanted to check what I still owned? Elise's eyes filled with angry tears. You don't understand, Oh, I understand perfectly, I interrupted, my voice suddenly steady, cold. You wanted to make sure you got your share. You made that very clear. She looked around wildly, as though searching for someone to back her up. This is Ruby's fault. She manipulated you. Didn't she, Graham? Graham hesitated, but the look on his face told me everything. They were united by greed, not love. Alden stepped in quietly. Mrs. Hartman was of completely sound mind during the drafting and signing process. No manipulation took place. Everything was documented. Elise turned back to me, her voice trembling now, half anger, half disbelief. Mom, how could you do this to us? I met her gaze, unflinching. Because you did it first. Silence fell again, thick and choking. They stared at me, the mother they thought they could control, as if seeing me for the first time. Ruby sat frozen, guilt flashing across her face. I reached over and touched her hand lightly. Don't you dare apologize, I whispered. You gave me something they never did, time, care, honesty. That's all I needed. Elise's breathing was shallow now, her face pale with shock. You'll regret this, she said finally. Maybe, I replied, but at least I'll regret it on my own terms. Graham's chair screeched against the floor as he stood, muttering curses under his breath. Elise followed, shaking her head, eyes bright with rage. They stormed out without another word, slamming the door behind them. For a long time, the house was utterly silent. Mr. Alden gathered his papers and gave me a small, respectful nod. You did the right thing, Mrs. Hartman. When he left, Ruby stayed behind, her hands trembling slightly. Clara, that was necessary. I finished for her. It was long overdue. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the flickering candles, the untouched dessert, the empty chairs. For the first time in decades, I wasn't afraid of their absence, because now, the silence wasn't loneliness anymore. It was justice. And in that silence, I knew this was only the beginning of what they truly deserved. Elise stood up and shouted words that would ignite the next firestorm. Elise's chair scraped violently across the floor. The sound sliced through the quiet like a scream. Her face was red, her eyes wild. You're not our mother anymore, she shouted. For a moment, everything went still. Even the candle flames seemed to pause, their glow trembling against the walls. I stayed seated. My hands rested calmly on the tablecloth. I'd rehearsed this moment in my mind for weeks, but the real thing was far uglier, more human. Elise, I said softly, sit down. No, she cried, tears pooling in her eyes. I can't believe this. After everything we've done for you, after Dad died, this is how you repay us? Graham pushed his chair back too, though less dramatically. He looked furious, but also lost. Mom, this isn't you, he said, his voice low but shaking. This woman, he jabbed a finger toward Ruby, got into your head. She's been using you. Ruby flinched but didn't back away. That's not true. Oh, shut up, Elise snapped. You think we don't see what's going on? You wormed your way in, pretending to care, and now you get everything while we get $1? I took a deep breath. Ruby didn't ask for anything. She didn't even know about the will until tonight. That's impossible, Elise barked. You've always been gullible. She must have brainwashed you or something. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Mr. Alden, who'd remained standing by the doorway, cleared his throat. Mrs. Hartman's decision was made independently. She contacted me personally, and I can attest she was of clear and sound mind throughout the process. Of course you'd say that, Graham muttered. She's paying you. Mr. Alden looked genuinely offended. Sir, my firm has represented your family for 20 years. But Elise wasn't listening anymore. She was trembling, her rage spilling into hysteria. You'll die alone in this house, she screamed. You'll regret cutting us off. Her words hit hard, sharper than she intended. I rose slowly from my chair, the legs scraping against the tile. You think I haven't already died alone? I asked quietly. Every birthday, every holiday, every dinner I ate at this table without you, that was a little death each time. Elise froze. You left me long before this will, I continued. All I did tonight was write the truth on paper. Ruby stood behind me now, silent but steady. I could feel her presence like an anchor. Graham slammed his fist on the table. You're delusional, he shouted. You're letting a stranger steal your family's future. I looked at him, really looked the boy I'd once rocked to sleep, now a man so blinded by greed he couldn't recognize love if it stood before him. You're angry because the future you planned, I said, isn't yours anymore. That's not theft, Graham, that's consequence. His face flushed. You're unbelievable. Maybe, I said softly. But at least I'm finally honest. Elise let out a strangled laugh. Honest? You lied to us for years. You made us think you'd take care of us, that this house, Dad's legacy, would stay in the family. You lied. I hoped. I corrected. I hoped you'd be the kind of people who deserved it. Her voice cracked. We do. I shook my head. No, sweetheart. You wanted money, not me. Silence. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator somewhere behind the kitchen wall. Ruby reached out gently. Maybe we should all take a breath, she murmured. But Elise wasn't finished. You think you're teaching us a lesson? She sneered. You think cutting us off makes you noble? All it does is prove what we already knew: you love playing the victim. The insult didn't sting. Not anymore. I'd worn that label for years, it had lost its power. I turned toward Mr. Alden. You can go now, I said softly. We're done here. He nodded once, gathered his briefcase, and left quietly through the front door. Elise's voice followed him down the hall. Yeah. Run off before she wakes up from this fantasy. The door closed with a heavy click. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Graham muttered something under his breath, a curse, a sound halfway between anger and despair, and started toward the door. Graham, I said gently. He stopped but didn't turn around. I loved you both more than anything, I said. That's what makes this so painful. But love without respect turns into pity. And I'm done living off pity, mine, or yours. He hesitated. I saw his shoulders stiffen, then drop. Without a word, he left. Elise stood motionless for a moment, her fists clenched at her sides. Then she looked at me, her voice trembling. I hope you're happy, Mom. You've destroyed this family. There was nothing left to destroy, I said quietly. She made a small, broken sound, half sob, half growl, and snatched her purse from the chair. As she turned to leave, she grabbed a wine glass from the table and hurled it at the wall. It shattered, the sound ringing through the house like a gunshot. Enjoy your peace, she spat. Then she was gone. The front door slammed so hard the picture frames rattled, and then silence. The kind of silence that presses against your skin, making every heartbeat sound too loud. I stood there, staring at the broken glass glinting in the candlelight. Ruby exhaled shakily. Are you okay? I nodded slowly. I'm fine. But the truth was, my hands were trembling, not from fear, from release. For years I'd avoided confrontation, terrified that standing up for myself would make me lose the people I loved. Tonight I realized I'd already lost them long ago. Ruby began cleaning up the shattered glass, muttering softly about how sharp the pieces were. I joined her, collecting the fragments carefully. When the floor was clean, I straightened up and looked around the room. Everything looked the same, the polished table, the flickering candles, the untouched dessert, but the air had shifted. It felt lighter. I walked to the window and looked out at the driveway. Their cars were gone. The night was quiet except for the whisper of wind through the trees. Ruby came to stand beside me. "You did the right thing, Clara," she said. "I know," I replied. "I just didn't expect it to hurt this much." She nodded. "Doing the right thing usually does." We stood there in silence for a long time, watching the moon climb higher. The anger, the shouting, the chaos, it all seemed to fade into the night air, leaving behind only exhaustion and a strange, fragile calm. Eventually, Ruby said, "You know they'll come back. They'll try to undo this." "I know," I said. "They'll fight the will. They'll say I wasn't in my right mind. That you manipulated me." "What will you do?" I smiled faintly. "Exactly what I've always done, tell the truth." Ruby smiled back, though her eyes were still full of worry. "Then you won't be alone when they do." I turned to her. "I'm not alone now." For the first time in years, I meant it. We blew out the candles one by one. The house fell into soft darkness, the smell of smoke and wine still lingering in the air. I should have felt sad, I suppose, but I didn't. Because finally, the house wasn't haunted by unspoken pain. It was quiet, peacefully quiet. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered into the dark, "It's over." But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Not yet. Because people like Elise and Graham don't give up what they think is owed to them. And sure enough, I would learn just how far they were willing to go to reclaim what they'd lost, even if it meant dragging my name through the courts. For now, though, I closed my eyes and let the silence cradle me. I knew I had lost my children that night, but I'd finally gained myself. The silence that followed wasn't loneliness anymore. It was peace. Until 2 months later, when I received a legal notice that changed everything. 2 months passed after the explosion at that dinner table. The house was quiet again, eerily so. No calls, no visits, no half-hearted apologies. Only silence, the kind that presses in on you when the noise finally dies. For a while, I thought maybe it was over. Maybe Elise and Graham had finally accepted my decision and moved on with their lives. I even started to enjoy small moments again. Morning coffee on the porch, pruning my roses, laughing with Ruby about the neighborhood gossip. Then, one morning, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. The return address was a law firm I didn't recognize. I slid it open with trembling fingers. The first line stole the breath from my lungs. "Notice of intent to contest last will and testament of Clara Hartman." I read it, twice before it made sense. They were suing me while I was still alive. My hands shook as I turned the pages, the words blurred together, all legal jargon and accusation. But one phrase cut through clearly, on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity. They were claiming that I'd been manipulated, that Ruby had coerced me into changing the will while I was mentally unstable. I laughed then, a sharp, bitter sound that startled even me. They hadn't called in weeks, but the second money slipped through their fingers, they found their voices again. Ruby came over as soon as I phoned her. She read the document, her eyes darkening. "This is disgusting," she whispered. "You're alive. How can they even—" "They don't care," I said. "They just want control back." She slammed the papers on the table. "We'll fight it. Whatever it takes." I nodded, though my chest ached. I wasn't scared for my money. I was scared for my dignity. That afternoon, I called Mr. Alden. He answered on the first ring. "I've been expecting your call," he said grimly. "They filed last week. Don't worry, Mrs. Hartman. We'll handle this." "I thought they couldn't contest while I'm still alive." "They can challenge your capacity," he explained. "Essentially, they're asking the court to declare you unfit to manage your own affairs. If they win, they gain control before your passing." The words made my stomach twist. "So they're trying to bury me before I'm even gone?" "Yes," he said quietly. "But we'll make sure they fail." He scheduled a court date, and Ruby insisted on accompanying me. "If they want to fight," she said, "they'll get one." The first hearing, the courthouse smelled of dust and old paper, cold, impersonal. Elise and Graham were already seated with their attorneys when we arrived. They didn't look at me. Elise wore black, as if mourning the money she'd lost. Graham's jaw was tight, his hands clenched on the table. Their lawyer, a slick man in a navy suit, stood when we entered and gave me a smile that felt like a threat. Mr. Alden leaned over and whispered, "Stay calm. Truth doesn't need to shout." The hearing began. Their attorney painted a picture of me as a frail, confused widow vulnerable to outside influence. He gestured dramatically toward Ruby. This woman inserted herself into Mrs. Hartman's life during a period of isolation, manipulating her trust to secure an inheritance. Ruby flinched. I reached over and squeezed her hand. Then it was our turn. Mr. Alden stood, his voice steady, patient. "Mrs. Hartman is of full and sound mind. We have medical documentation, signed statements, and her own words recorded at the time of the will's signing." He handed the judge a file thick with evidence, doctor reports, witness signatures, notarized records. When the judge turned to me, I met her gaze squarely. "I may be old," I said softly, "but I'm not confused. My children stopped being my family long before they lost my inheritance." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Elise's cheeks flushed scarlet. The depositions. The weeks that followed were brutal. Their lawyers demanded interviews, documents, even recordings of my phone calls. They dissected every interaction Ruby and I ever had, trying to prove I was incapable of making rational choices. During one deposition, their attorney asked, "Mrs. Hartman, do you often forget things?" I smiled. "Only the things not worth remembering." He frowned. "Do you trust Miss Miller implicitly?" "I trust her more than I trust my own blood," I replied. Elise muttered something under her breath. The lawyer tried to suppress a smirk, thinking he'd gotten under my skin. But I'd learned to wield silence like a blade. Every calm answer seemed to unsettle them more than anger ever could. Ruby endured hours of questioning too. When they accused her of manipulating me for financial gain, she looked them straight in the eye and said, "If I wanted her money, I wouldn't have told her to see a lawyer. I'd have let her sign it over to me on a napkin." Even the court reporter smiled at that. The turning point. By the third hearing, the cracks in their story began to show. Their evidence of my mental decline was laughable missed calls, misplaced mail, a doctor's note about mild fatigue. Mr. Alden presented testimony from my physician confirming I was entirely capable of managing my own affairs. He also produced the record of love notebook, which I had brought willingly. "This," he told the court, "isn't the work of a confused woman. It's the diary of a mother who documented every manipulation her children attempted. It's the clearest timeline of exploitation I've ever seen." He read aloud a few entries. Each one was a dagger. "Elise called today. Asked about the house again. Promised a visit. Never came. Graham offered to help with my finances. Asked for my account numbers." The judge's expression hardened with every page. When Elise's lawyer objected, saying the notebook was subjective, Mr. Alden replied, "So is a memory. But at least this one is written down." For the first time, I saw something flicker in Elise's eyes, not anger but shame. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. The verdict. After months of hearings, paperwork, and sleepless nights, the judge finally ruled. She spoke clearly, her tone firm. "This court finds no evidence of diminished capacity or undue influence. The will stands as written. The petition to contest is dismissed." Elise gasped. Graham muttered a curse. Their lawyer looked defeated. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. Ruby reached for me, whispering, "You did it." But I wasn't smiling. I wasn't celebrating. Because winning didn't feel like victory, it felt like the quiet after a storm, when the wreckage is still being counted. As we left the courtroom, Elise called after me, her voice shaking. "I didn't do this to be right, Elise. I did it to be free." She stared at me for a long moment, then looked away. Aftermath. The local paper caught wind of the story. A wealthy widow. A contested will. A mysterious neighbor inheriting everything. The gossip spread fast. Some people whispered that Ruby was a gold digger. Others said I was a cold, vengeful woman. Neither of us cared. We knew the truth. Ruby continued visiting daily, tending the garden, bringing laughter back into the house. Sometimes we'd sit on the porch and watch the sunset in silence. I'd sip my tea and say, "You know, peace doesn't always mean quiet." She'd smile. "No, but it sure feels good when it finally comes." That night, I wrote one last entry in my notebook. They tried to fight the dead before I was even gone. But I'm still here, and that's what hurts them most. I closed the book and placed it beside Daniel's photo. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even bitter. I was simply done. The case was over, but the story wasn't. Because the next time I saw Elise and Graham, I would give them something no court could ever rule on: closure, on my own terms. My revenge was not complete. Not yet. It had been nearly 6 months since the court dismissed their lawsuit when I decided to invite my children back to my home one last time. Not for reconciliation. Not for peace. For closure. By then, the tension had cooled to a bitter, polite distance. Elise and Graham hadn't spoken to me directly since the ruling, but I'd heard through neighbors that they were still angry, embarrassed. Even, the story had spread across town, whispered about in grocery aisles and coffee shops, the siblings who sued their mother and lost. I wasn't interested in humiliating them further. I just wanted the story to end properly on my terms. So, one morning, I sat at my kitchen table, pen in hand, and wrote them both identical letters. Dinner, Sunday at 6, just family. No lawyers, no arguments. I mailed them the same day, and then I waited. When Sunday came, I wasn't sure they'd actually show, but at exactly 6 o'clock, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. 2 cars, 2 children, 2 ghosts from a life I once thought I'd never have to mourn. When I opened the door, Elise stood there first. Her face was drawn, her expression cautious. "Mom," she said stiffly. Behind her, Graham offered a brief nod. "Evening." I smiled softly. "Come in." The house smelled of homemade soup and fresh bread. The lights were dim but warm, the table set simply, no silver candlesticks, no performance this time, just 3 bowls, 3 spoons, and a pot still steaming on the stove. They hesitated as if expecting another trick. I gestured to the chairs. "Please. Sit." Elise cleared her throat as she sat down. "You look... well, I am," I said. "Better than I've been in a long time." Silence settled between us, thick and uneasy. Graham reached for his spoon but didn't eat. "So," he said finally, "what's this about?" I ladled soup into their bowls, simple vegetable stew, the kind Daniel used to love. "It's about saying goodbye," I said quietly. Properly, this time. Elise frowned. "Goodbye? What are you talking about?" I met her eyes. "You and your brother have made it clear you don't want me, only what I have, and I've made it clear you'll never get it. So this dinner is to end it civilly. No screaming, no lawyers, no courtrooms. Just the truth." She exhaled sharply. "You really think you're the victim here, don't you?" "No," I said. "I think I'm the survivor." The words hung there. Ruby's phrasing echoed in my mind. "You deserve to be surrounded by people who choose you." I realized then that I'd finally chosen myself. Graham rubbed his temples. "Mom, we messed up, okay? But you didn't have to destroy us." "I didn't destroy you," I said evenly. "You did that yourselves the moment you put greed before family." He looked down at his bowl, his jaw tight. "You could have just talked to us." I smiled sadly. "I tried. You never listened. You only heard what you wanted." Elise shifted in her chair. "We were scared," she said quietly. "After Dad died, everything fell on you. We thought maybe you couldn't handle it all, and then this stranger." "Ruby isn't a stranger," I interrupted. "She's the only person who treated me like I still mattered. And she never once asked for anything in return." Elise's eyes watered, but her pride wouldn't let her cry. You replaced us with her. No, I said. You replaced yourselves. For a while, no one spoke. The clock ticked softly on the wall, steady and unbothered by the silence. When I finally spoke again, my voice was calm, but firm. Do you know why I invited you for soup? Elise blinked. What? Because the last time I cooked a full meal for you both, you left me sitting at this table alone. You said something came up. Their faces froze. I waited for hours, I continued, my words slow and deliberate. I sat in that chair right there, watching the candles burn down. I ate cold turkey and mashed potatoes by myself. And I promised that would be the last time I waited for anyone who didn't want to be here. Graham sighed heavily, guilt flickering across his face. We were young, Mom. We didn't mean to hurt you. But you did, I said. And you kept doing it, year after year. He looked away, his voice low. So this is it, huh? The grand finale? I gave a small laugh. No, there's nothing grand about it. It's just the truth. Simple, quiet, and long overdue. Elise swallowed. Hard. So what now? You never want to see us again? I took a moment to think before answering. I don't know, I said finally. I think forgiveness and distance can coexist. But I can't forget, not anymore. The words seemed to soften something in her. Her voice trembled as she said, I miss how we used to be. So do I whispered. But we can't go back. We burned that bridge together. Tears slipped down her cheeks then. Quiet and unrestrained. Graham's eyes glistened too, though he quickly wiped them away. I reached out, placing a hand over Elise's. She flinched at first, then let me hold it. I don't hate you, I said. But love without respect dies. And I can't live pretending it hasn't. For the first time in years, she didn't argue. She just nodded faintly, her lips trembling. We sat there in silence. The three of us. The weight of years pressing down around us. The soup grew cold, but none of us cared. After a while, Graham stood. Thank you for dinner, he said quietly. For everything. Elise followed, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, Mom. I know, I said. I just wish sorry could fix everything it broke. They both hesitated at the door, unsure of whether to hug me or leave without a word. In the end, Elise leaned forward and gave me a brief, hesitant embrace. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't anger either. When they left, the house fell silent again. I stood in the doorway, watching their taillights disappear down the road. Ruby came by an hour later, as she often did, and found me sitting at the table, staring at the untouched soup bowls. How'd it go? She asked gently. As expected, I said. We said what needed to be said. She studied me for a moment. Do you feel better? I feel finished, I replied. And that's better than peace. Ruby nodded and began helping me clear the table. When she reached for Elise's bowl, I stopped her. Leave it, I said softly. Let it sit for a while. We stood there quietly. The room bathed in the soft glow of the kitchen light. I felt neither joy nor sadness, just a strange, calm acceptance. That night, before bed, I wrote one final note in my record of love. They came. They listened. And for the first time, they left with something more than they expected: the truth. When I closed the notebook, I knew there would be no more entries. My story with them had ended exactly where it began, around a dinner table. I turned off the lights, letting the house settle into its familiar stillness. But this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was earned. That night, I whispered to the ghosts of every meal I'd eaten alone. You left me to eat alone. But now, you'll remember that silence forever. They left without a word. Ruby hugged me afterward, whispering, You did it. But there was still one message I needed to leave behind. After that final dinner, the house felt quieter than ever, but not in the same way it used to. It wasn't the hollow silence of loneliness anymore, it was the silence of completion. The kind that comes after the last chapter is written, when there's nothing left to say out loud. Except, there was something. One last thing. I knew my story wasn't over until I gave Elise and Graham something they couldn't contest, rewrite, or twist the truth, written in my own hand. So, a week after the dinner, I sat down at my old oak desk with a cup of tea, a box of stationery, and my favorite fountain pen. I began writing. The first letter was for Elise. My dearest Elise, I know that when you read this, I'll already be gone. I hope by then, time has softened the edges of your anger. I hope you've learned that love isn't something you can demand, it's something you give freely and something you can lose without even realizing it. You once told me that everything you do is for family. I used to believe that. But somewhere along the way, family became less about love and more about gain. I don't blame you entirely. I know the world taught you that success means security, and security means control. But, Elise, there's no control in love. It's surrender. It's showing up even when it's inconvenient. I waited for you. For calls, for visits, for words that never came. And when they finally did, they always came with a price tag attached. But here's what you didn't see. Every time you asked for something, I still said yes. Because mothers do. We love even when it hurts. When you found out about the will, I saw the little girl you used to be, furious, frightened, desperate to feel safe. But safety doesn't live in a deed or a bank account. It lives in knowing you did right by the people who loved you. I hope you find that safety one day. You always wanted my approval, Elise, but you already had it. I just wished you'd wanted my heart instead. I loved you then, I love you now, and I always will. But love without respect cannot survive, and mine has done its best for far too long. This is not a punishment. It's a lesson, one I hope you'll carry long after the ink on this letter fades. With love. Mom. I sat back and wiped away the tears that had fallen onto the paper, smudging the ink slightly. It didn't matter. Maybe those smudges would remind her that my love wasn't clean or perfect, it was messy, real, human. Then I began the second letter, the one for Graham. My son, you were always my quiet one, the peacemaker, the one who tried to make things seem better than they were. I think that's what hurt most, not your words, but your silence. I used to think you stayed away because you were busy, building your life. But later, I realized it was because you couldn't face me, or what you'd become. You told yourself you were protecting me. But the truth is, you were protecting your comfort. You didn't want to see the loneliness you helped create. You've always been clever, Graham. Too clever. You know how to say the right thing, how to make people trust you. But honesty isn't just about words, it's about presence. You can't love someone from a distance and call it devotion. When you stood in that courtroom and tried to convince the judge that I wasn't of sound mind, you broke something in me that no apology could fix. You made me feel invisible in the eyes of the world, like I was already dead. But here's what you didn't realize. In that moment, you gave me my strength back. You reminded me that even when the world tries to silence me, I still have my voice. I don't hate you, Graham. I don't even resent you anymore. I pity you. Because the kind of emptiness that makes someone fight their own mother isn't born overnight, it grows in the absence of gratitude. You can still change that. You can still be a better man than the one who walked away from me. But that's your choice now, not mine. I hope, one day, you'll remember me not as the woman who left you nothing, but as the mother who tried to leave you wisdom instead. Love always, Mom. By the time I finished, my hand ached and the sky outside had turned dusky purple. I placed both letters side by side, staring at them for a long time. They looked so small, so fragile, considering how much they carried. Then, I began the final letter, the one that wasn't born of regret, but gratitude. This one was for Ruby. My dearest Ruby, you came into my life when I had already given up on the idea of being loved without condition. You brought laughter into rooms that had only known silence, and warmth into a house that had gone cold. You reminded me that kindness isn't something you earn, it's something people choose to give. I know you never wanted anything from me. That's exactly why I chose to give you everything. You helped me see that love can still exist in the world, even when it no longer comes from blood. Please don't let my gift become a burden. The house, the money, the name, they're not chains, they're chances. Use them to build something beautiful. Use them to make others feel seen, the way you made me feel. You once told me, you deserve to be surrounded by people who choose you. You were right, and I hope you never forget that you deserve the same. Thank you for choosing me, Ruby. For loving me like family, when family forgot how. Forever grateful, Clara. When I was done, I sealed each letter in an envelope and pressed a small dried rose from my garden inside each one. It felt fitting, something once fragile, preserved by time and care. I took them to Mr. Alden's office the next day. He looked surprised when I handed him the stack. These are to be delivered after my passing, I said. Exactly 1 month after the funeral. He hesitated. Do you want me to read them? No, I said firmly. They're not for the world, they're for my children and for my friend. He nodded respectfully and placed the letters into a secure envelope. It will be done. As I left his office, I felt lighter, almost serene. For the first time in decades, I had no lingering words left unsaid. Every truth, every wound, every apology that could be given, I'd given it. That night, I sat in the garden under the stars. The air was cool and fragrant, the roses swaying gently in the breeze. I closed my eyes and thought of Daniel, his voice, his laugh, the way he used to tell me that love always finds its way back home. Maybe, in some strange way, it finally had. When Ruby stopped by later with a plate of cookies, she found me humming softly, the letters gone, the house filled with quiet contentment. You seem different, she said. I am, I replied. I've said everything that needed to be said, she smiled. That must feel good. It does, I said. Closure always does. As she turned to leave, I whispered under my breath, more to myself than to her. I wonder what they'll think when they read them. Ruby looked back at me. What do you mean? I smiled faintly. They'll understand. Finally, not just what they lost, but what they could have had. And I was right, because those letters would go on to do what years of silence and shouting never could. Little did I know, those letters would make headlines. When I sat in that garden under the stars, I didn't know that my story was already beginning to ripple far beyond the walls of my quiet home. I didn't know that a few pages of handwritten truth sealed in envelopes and pressed with dried roses would outlive me in ways I could never have imagined. Time has a way of carrying our choices into corners we'll never see. I made mine, and then, peacefully, I let the world move on without me. A few months later, when I passed away in my sleep, the world didn't shake. No crowds gathered, no headlines screamed my name, not yet. It was a quiet passing, the kind I'd always wanted. Ruby was the one who found me that morning. She told me once, later, that I looked peaceful. Like someone who'd already finished everything she came here to do. The funeral was small. Just Ruby, a handful of neighbors, and a few church friends. Elise and Graham stood in the back, black clothes and unreadable faces, their eyes darting toward Ruby every few seconds. They didn't speak to her. They didn't have to. The tension between them was its own language. When the service ended, Ruby placed a bouquet of garden roses on my coffin, the same kind I'd grown every spring. Then, quietly, she whispered, "You did it, Clara." It was the last act of kindness she ever gave me in person. But the one that came after would change everything. The letters. 1 month later, as instructed, Mr. Alden fulfilled my final request. He personally delivered 3 envelopes, one to Ruby, one to Elise, one to Graham. Elise received hers first. She opened it alone, sitting in her living room surrounded by silence and guilt she still refused to name. When she saw my handwriting, her breath caught. At first, she didn't want to read it. But she did. By the time she reached the final paragraph, tears had smudged the ink. She read the words over and over, "You already had my approval. I just wished you'd wanted my heart instead." Neighbors later said they'd seen her sitting on her porch that night, clutching the letter like it was something sacred, something lost. Graham's letter arrived the next morning. He opened it at his office, in the privacy of his corner desk, pretending to be busy while his co-workers joked nearby. But when he read the line, "You made me feel invisible in the eyes of the world like I was already dead," something inside him cracked. He left work early that day, drove for hours without a destination, and ended up parked outside the house he grew up in. He didn't go inside. He just sat there, staring at the front door, until the sun went down. And Ruby, sweet, kind Ruby, opened hers at the kitchen table. The same one where we'd shared hundreds of cups of tea. She smiled through her tears when she read my words. "You reminded me that kindness isn't something you earn, it's something people choose to give," she told Mr. Alden later that she felt like I was still sitting across from her, smiling that same quiet smile. The story spreads. But what none of them expected, not Ruby, not my children, not even Mr. Alden, was what happened next. Elise, in a rare moment of vulnerability, posted a picture of her letter on social media. The caption read, "My mother left me nothing in her will. But she left me this. And somehow, it's worth more." Within hours, thousands of people had shared it. Strangers from all over the world commented, writing things like, "This broke me," and "I needed to read this today." Others shared stories of their own fractured families, their regrets, their lost parents. Within a week, a local journalist reached out to Elise. Then national outlets picked it up. The mother who left her children $1 and everything else to a stranger. It was everywhere. People debated whether I was cruel or courageous, whether Ruby had taken advantage of me or saved me. But the truth, my truth, was right there in my own words. And that truth resonated with millions. Ruby received hundreds of letters from strangers thanking her for showing that love doesn't have to be blood to be real. She read them all, crying sometimes, smiling others. Then she did something that made me prouder than anything I could have written. She used a portion of her inheritance to create the Hartman Foundation, a small nonprofit dedicated to helping elderly people reconnect with their estranged families or, when that wasn't possible, to help them find new ones. She called it the Second Chance Project. I would have laughed at the name. It was exactly what I'd needed all those years ago, a second chance to feel chosen. The children. For a long time, Elise and Graham avoided Ruby, too ashamed to face her. But as the months passed, something shifted. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe it was the hundreds of messages they received from strangers who saw themselves in our story. Eventually, they reached out. Not for money, for forgiveness. Elise sent Ruby an email first. It was short. "I'm sorry for the things I said about you. You were good to her. Thank you." Ruby wrote back, "She never blamed you. She just wanted you to learn." Graham followed a few weeks later, volunteering at one of the foundation's community dinners. He stayed quiet most of the evening, just helping serve food, wiping tables, listening. By the end of the night, he told Ruby softly, "She'd like what you're doing here." Ruby smiled. "She'd like that you're here." In the months that followed, both my children became regulars at the foundation. They weren't healed, not yet, but they were trying. And that, I think, was enough. What I left behind, people say revenge is about making someone suffer, but mine was never about suffering, it was about awakening. I didn't want to destroy Elise and Graham. I wanted them to see. To understand the weight of absence, the cost of neglect, the quiet ache of being forgotten. I left them nothing tangible, but I gave them something much heavier. Reflection. Ruby told me once that grief is love with nowhere to go. Maybe that's what my letters became, a place for all that unspoken love to finally land. Now, when people visit the foundation, they often find a framed quote hanging on the wall. It's the last thing I ever wrote in my record of love. Family isn't who shares your blood, it's who shares your silence and still chooses to stay. Ruby made that the foundation's motto. She visits my grave every Sunday, always bringing fresh roses from the garden we once tended together. Sometimes she talks to me out loud, updating me on the world, how the foundation is growing, how Elise and Graham are helping now, how she still feels my presence when the wind moves through the flowers. And every now and then, she says the same thing she whispered at my funeral. You did it, Clara. I hope she's right. Because if I learned anything in the quiet of my final years, it's this peace isn't what happens when everything ends. It's what remains when you've told the truth, even if it hurts. My story wasn't about wealth or revenge or even loss. It was about love, the kind that waits, breaks, forgives, and eventually learns to let go. And if somewhere out there, a daughter sits down to call her mother again because of a story she read online, then maybe I've done something that mattered after all. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't anger, it's peace.